You are not tired because you lack money, but because you are carrying far more than your soul was ever meant to hold. Sit with me for a moment. Imagine the fire is low, its embers breathing softly, and time itself has slowed enough to listen. Across history, across empires and ideologies, there is a quiet question that has haunted humanity more persistently than poverty or wealth itself. The question is not how to get more, but when enough became too much. We live in an age where abundance is everywhere and peace is rare. Closets are full, yet minds feel cramped. Accounts grow, yet sleep becomes fragile. We chase freedom through accumulation, never noticing that every new possession quietly tightens the rope around our attention, our time, our breath. And the most dangerous part is this: the cage feels comfortable. It is decorated. It is praised. More than 2,000 years ago, on a dusty street in ancient Greece, a man with no house, no status, and no shame held up a mirror to civilization. His name was Diogenes. He owned almost nothing, and that terrified the powerful more than any army ever could. One moment, one small gesture, would turn his philosophy into a legend that still unsettles us today. Not because it is extreme, but because it is honest. This is not a story about rejecting wealth. It is a story about reclaiming sovereignty, about understanding the hidden cost of desire, about realizing that freedom is not something you buy, but something you remove obstacles from. If this journey resonates with you, if these ideas feel like a quiet truth you have sensed but never named, I invite you to support this space. Like the video, subscribe to the Echoes of Wealth channel, or, if you wish, leave a small donation to help keep these stories alive by the fire. Now, let us begin where the world began to feel heavy. The most dangerous lie ever sold to humanity is not that money buys happiness, but that you need more of everything just to breathe freely. Tonight, sit closer to the fire. Let the noise of the day recede. Because what we are about to confront is not a financial strategy, not a productivity trick, not another promise of abundance disguised as wisdom. It is something far more unsettling. A truth so simple that civilizations spend centuries building distractions to avoid it. You have been taught, subtly and relentlessly, that your worth expands with what you own. That comfort is proof of progress, that the accumulation of objects, experiences, upgrades, and symbols is the same thing as growth. Yet if this were true, this would be the calmest era in human history. It is not. Anxiety is everywhere. Restlessness hums beneath every conversation. Even success feels brittle, as if one unexpected moment could shatter it. There is a reason for this. Possessions do not merely sit quietly in our lives. They speak. They whisper obligations. They demand maintenance. They ask for protection. They pull your attention away from the present and chain it to fear of loss. And slowly, without ceremony, you begin to live not to be free, but to sustain what you already have. History has seen this pattern before. Empires collapsed not because they lacked resources, but because they could no longer carry their own weight. Individuals collapse the same way, not with a scream, but with exhaustion. Now imagine the opposite extreme. Imagine a man who owns almost nothing. No house, no furniture, no reputation to defend, no future to ensure. A man so detached from possessions that he becomes immune to threat, immune to flattery, immune to control. This man existed, and the world did not know what to do with him. Diogenes of Sinope did not preach from temples or write treatises for elites. He lived in public. He slept in a large ceramic jar near the marketplace. He begged when he needed to. He mocked kings. He challenged philosophers. And unlike them, he could not be bribed, because he needed nothing from anyone. The story that survived him is deceptively small. One day, Diogenes owned a single object he considered necessary: a simple wooden cup used to drink water. That was it. No backups, no replacements, no excess. Then he watched a child kneel at a stream and drink with his hands. No tools, no ownership, just need, fulfilled directly. Diogenes stared, and without ceremony, he threw his cup away. In that moment, he did not lose something. He was liberated from it. This single gesture contains a lesson modern finance refuses to teach, not because it is false, but because it is destabilizing. The fewer things you need, the fewer levers the world has to pull you by, the lower your required income, the less power employers, markets, and crises have over your choices. Wealth, in its truest form, is not how much you own, but how little you require to remain unshaken. This is why minimalism is misunderstood. It is not aesthetic. It is not moral. It is strategic. It is psychological warfare against dependency. It is the deliberate reduction of pressure points in your life. What follows in this long journey is not an argument for poverty. It is an exploration of sufficiency, of understanding where the line truly lies between comfort and captivity. We will walk through ancient Greece, imperial Rome, monastic Europe, feudal Japan, and modern financial systems, tracing one invisible law. Every time humans confused accumulation with security, they became easier to control. Every time someone chose less, they gained an advantage no one could see until it was too late. If you are tired of chasing, if abundance feels strangely hollow, if wealth seems close yet never calming, then this story is not entertainment. It is a map back to yourself. And now, we begin with the man who dared to discard even the last thing he owned. Before Diogenes became a symbol, before his name hardened into legend, he was simply a man watching the world hurry past him. Athens breathed loudly in those days. Stone against sandal, coin against palm, voice against voice. The city was alive with persuasion. Every man was selling something: olive oil, ideas, virtue, destiny. The marketplace was not merely a place of trade. It was a theater where identity was performed daily, and Diogenes chose to sit at its edge, unmoving, like a crack in the stage. He lived inside a pithos, a massive ceramic jar abandoned near the temple of Cybele. Not hidden, not romantic, not symbolic in the way modern minds try to soften it. It was practical. It was available. It was enough. When rain came, the jar blocked the wind. When heat arrived, the clay stayed cool. Diogenes did not decorate it. He did not improve it. Improvement implies dissatisfaction. He was not dissatisfied. To understand how radical this was, you must understand Athens. This was a city drunk on status. Sophists polished words like jewelry. Politicians sculpted reputations more carefully than statues. Even philosophers, those who spoke of virtue and restraint, often lived comfortably on patronage. Their poverty was theoretical. Diogenes was real, and that made him dangerous. He had been trained once. He studied under Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, who believed virtue was sufficient for happiness. But Diogenes took the idea further than anyone expected. He did not just speak of detachment. He embodied it. He turned philosophy into a physical practice, stripping life down until nothing unnecessary remained. There were rumors about his past, and rumors mattered in Athens. It was said his father handled currency in Sinope, and that both were exiled for corrupting the coinage. Whether this was crime or metaphor, Diogenes carried the lesson like a scar. When value becomes artificial, society rots. When symbols replace substance, collapse follows. He would spend his life attacking false currency in all its forms. Money, status, politeness, hypocrisy. Diogenes begged when hungry. He ate when food appeared. He slept when tired. He relieved himself publicly, not to shock for pleasure, but to expose the absurdity of pretending that natural functions were shameful while greed was celebrated. When mocked, he laughed. When praised, he ignored it. Praise, like insult, is a hook. And still, despite all this, he kept one object: a single wooden cup, smooth from use, light enough to carry. It seemed reasonable, necessary, even. Water must be drunk. Tools exist for a reason. This was not luxury. This was practicality. That is why the moment matters. The child did not announce himself. There was no audience, no prophecy, just a boy at the river's edge, knees dusty, cupping his hands and drinking. Efficient, direct, no intermediary, need met by reality itself. Diogenes watched. This was not envy. It was recognition, a quiet, piercing realization that something had slipped into his life unnoticed. The cup had not enslaved him violently. It had done so politely. It offered convenience. It asked nothing. That is how dependency enters. Not as a threat, but as a favor. Without drama, he dropped the cup. Wood struck stone. A dull sound. No one clapped. No one cared. But in that sound, an entire philosophy collapsed and reformed. Diogenes had discovered a deeper layer of freedom. Not freedom from wealth, but freedom from mediation. He had removed one more layer between desire and fulfillment. This is where modern minds misunderstand him. They imagine spectacle, madness, extremism. But Diogenes was precise, surgical. He did not remove things arbitrarily. He removed what was unnecessary. Ask yourself this quietly. How many things in your life exist not because you need them, but because you once decided you might? How many objects remain because removing them would force you to confront who you are without them? Every possession introduces friction, storage, maintenance, replacement, fear. Even admiration has a cost. Once you own something admired, You must defend it, upgrade it, protect it. This defense consumes energy you never notice leaving. Diogenes understood burn rate long before spreadsheets. He understood that the lower your needs, the lower your vulnerability. Hunger can be satisfied. Cold can be endured. But desire, once trained, becomes insatiable. Athens did not hate Diogenes because he was poor. Athens hated him because he was immune. Immune to shame. Immune to temptation. Immune to leverage. You cannot threaten a man who has already rehearsed losing everything. From a financial lens, this is the most subversive idea imaginable. The system depends on you needing to sustain complexity, on you requiring a certain income just to survive the lifestyle you have already constructed. Debt, subscriptions, upgrades, expectations. These are modern cups. They feel small, reasonable, necessary. Until you see the child at the river, Diogenes did not preach minimalism. He demonstrated sufficiency. He showed that wealth is not an amount, but a ratio between desire and requirement. Reduce one, and the other changes automatically. This is the foundation. Everything else follows from here. The cup shattered because it was never about the cup. It was about discovering how little stands between you and freedom. After the cup was gone, nothing dramatic happened. The sun did not change its course. The marketplace did not fall silent. Athens did not pause to reconsider its values. That is how revolutions of the soul usually occur. Quietly, internally, without witnesses. And yet, from that moment on, Diogenes crossed an invisible threshold. He was no longer merely poor. He was unburdened. To the Athenians, this distinction was incomprehensible. Poverty, in their minds, was a temporary state, a flaw to be corrected through fortune or favor. Unburdened living, however, suggested something far more disturbing. It suggested choice, and choice threatens every hierarchy built on aspiration. Diogenes became more deliberate after that day. His discipline sharpened. He trained himself to endure heat by embracing it, cold by exposing himself to it. In winter, he rolled in frozen sand. In summer, he lay beneath the burning sun, not as punishment, but as inoculation. He was vaccinating himself against fear. When the body learns it can survive discomfort, the mind loses its bargaining power. People laughed at him. They threw scraps. They mocked his appearance, his smell, his refusal to conform. Diogenes accepted it all with unsettling calm. Insults only work when they threaten something you value. Strip away the attachment, and the weapon dulls. There is a little-known account that Diogenes once asked a statue for alms. When questioned why he begged from stone, he replied that he was practicing being refused. This was not bitterness. It was training. He was rehearsing rejection so that approval would never rule him. Think about that. Most people structure their entire lives to avoid rejection. Careers are chosen, opinions softened, desires postponed, all to preserve belonging. Diogenes inverted the strategy. He sought refusal until it lost its sting. In doing so, he became ungovernable. From a financial perspective, this is the missing education. We are taught how to earn, how to grow, how to optimize. We are not taught how to lose. And because we do not rehearse loss, we panic when it arrives. Panic leads to bad decisions. Bad decisions compound faster than interest. Diogenes reduced his exposure to panic to nearly zero. He owned nothing that could be taken from him. No property to seize. No reputation to ruin. No lifestyle to maintain. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the known world, stood before him and offered anything he desired, Diogenes asked only that he stop blocking the sunlight. That was not arrogance. It was accuracy. Alexander had nothing Diogenes needed. This encounter would echo through history, not because Diogenes rejected wealth, but because he exposed its limits. Power only exists where desire exists. Remove desire, and power collapses. Modern systems understand this instinctively. That is why desire is constantly stimulated. New needs are invented. Old ones are reframed as insufficiencies. Comfort becomes baseline. Baseline becomes dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction becomes consumption. Diogenes was immune because he had lowered his baseline below the reach of manipulation. Consider your own life through this lens, not with judgment, with curiosity. How much of your income is devoted not to living, but to preserving an identity constructed years ago? A version of yourself that once felt aspirational, but now feels heavy. How many commitments persist simply because unwinding them would be uncomfortable? This is the unseen cost of the cup. The cup is never just a cup. It is the first layer of convenience that trains you to accept mediation. Instead of drinking directly, you need a tool. Instead of resting, you need permission. Instead of enough, you need more. Diogenes did not hate tools. He hated unconscious dependence. The moment he saw a simpler path, he took it without hesitation. Most people see the simpler path every day and walk past it, afraid of what it implies. Because simplicity asks a dangerous question. If this is enough, then why have I been running? Athens continued to build bigger homes, grand temples, complex alliances. Diogenes continued to strip away. One direction led to empire. The other led to sovereignty. History would celebrate one and quietly fear the other. The brilliance of Diogenes lies not in extremity, but in clarity. He understood that freedom is not granted. It is engineered through subtraction. Every removed dependency widens your margin of safety. Every lowered requirement increases your negotiating power with life itself. This is not a call to abandon society. It is a call to audit it, to identify which parts of your life genuinely serve you, and which exist because you once believed you needed them. The child at the river did not know he was teaching philosophy. He simply drank. And in that act, he revealed a truth that still unsettles modern finance. You need less than you think, and what you do not need cannot control you. As Diogenes' reputation spread, something strange began to happen. People did not merely laugh at him. They watched him closely, as if trying to solve a riddle that refused to stay still. Athens was a city of teachers, yet here was a man who taught without lectures. He offered no structured lessons, no neat syllogisms, no comforting conclusions. He lived the question instead, and that made people uneasy, because answers can be debated, but examples are harder to escape. Diogenes positioned himself where contradictions were loudest, near the gymnasiums, where young men trained their bodies while neglecting their character, near the courts where justice was sold in polished phrases, near the academies where wisdom was discussed endlessly but rarely practiced. He watched, waited, and then punctured the illusion with a single sentence, sometimes with silence alone. There is a story rarely repeated outside old texts. One day, Plato defined man as a featherless biped. Diogenes plucked a chicken, brought it into the academy, and declared, "Behold, Plato's man." The laughter stung, not because it was cruel, but because it exposed how easily language drifts away from reality. Abstractions comfort us. Simplicity threatens us. This same tension exists in modern wealth. We talk endlessly about freedom, abundance, and independence, while building lives that require constant input to function. More income, more energy, more compliance. The system is fragile because it is heavy. Diogenes saw fragility everywhere. He understood that what appears strong is often just burdened. True resilience looks unimpressive. It does not shine. It endures. By removing the cup, he removed the expectation of convenience. By removing convenience, he trained adaptability. When you can adapt, you no longer need to predict perfectly. And when you do not need perfect predictions, you are less vulnerable to chaos. This is where the financial lesson deepens. Most people design their lives for optimal conditions: stable income, predictable markets, continuous growth. They assume the sun will always shine. Diogenes designed for collapse, and in doing so, he became collapse-proof. He ate whatever was available, slept wherever he could, asked nothing of the future. This was not nihilism. It was strategic presence. He lived entirely within his means because his means were internal. There are accounts of Diogenes walking barefoot through snow, smiling at those wrapped in expensive cloaks. Not out of superiority, but demonstration. He was showing that suffering is not always imposed by circumstance, but often by expectation. When expectation drops, reality feels lighter. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If tomorrow required you to live on half of what you spend today, what would break first? Not what would inconvenience you. What would genuinely threaten your identity? The answer reveals your true dependencies. Modern finance celebrates optimization. But optimization without resilience creates brittleness. Diogenes optimized for nothing but sovereignty. He accepted inefficiency in exchange for indestructibility. This is why rulers found him unsettling. You can rule through fear only if fear has something to cling to. You can rule through reward only if reward is desired. Diogenes had severed both channels. He was unreachable. There is a moment recorded where someone asked Diogenes what wine he preferred. He replied, "The kind someone else is paying for." The humor hides a deeper truth. He did not oppose pleasure. He refused to organize his life around it. Pleasure becomes dangerous when it turns into requirement. Comfort becomes dangerous when it becomes baseline. This is how lifestyles trap people. Slowly, politely, with consent. The cup was consent. By discarding it, Diogenes withdrew his consent from unnecessary mediation. He chose direct engagement with life. Cold water on skin. Hunger met by food, not ritual. Sleep when tired, not scheduled. Translate this into financial terms. Directness means fewer intermediaries between effort and reward. Fewer subscriptions. Fewer obligations. Fewer financial products designed to extract convenience fees from your attention. The simpler the flow, the less friction steals from you invisibly. Diogenes did not track net worth. He tracked exposure. Exposure to dependency. Exposure to manipulation. Exposure to fear. His wealth was measured in how little could be taken from him. And that is the paradox modern minds struggle with. The more you accumulate without intention, the poorer you become in options. The lighter your life, the faster you can move when conditions change. History remembers conquerors because they left ruins. It remembers Diogenes because he left nothing, and nothing could not be stolen. The child at the river did not know he was freeing a philosopher. But in that simple act, he demonstrated the most powerful financial principle ever ignored. Lower your needs, and the world loses its grip. As the years passed, Diogenes aged, but his posture never bent toward compromise. His body weakened, yet his presence grew sharper, like a blade honed by time rather than dulled by it. Athens changed around him. New leaders rose. Old philosophies softened. Comfort crept into places that once spoke of virtue. Diogenes remained unmoved. People began to seek him out not for answers, but for permission. Permission to want less. Permission to step away from the exhausting theater of ambition. Some came out of curiosity. Others came in secret, ashamed to admit that the chase had hollowed them out. Diogenes offered no comfort, only clarity. There is an account of a wealthy Athenian who asked Diogenes how he might achieve peace. Diogenes did not speak immediately. He simply gestured at the man's servants, his fine clothing, his rings. Then he said quietly that peace is not something added to a life, but something revealed when unnecessary weight is removed. This was unbearable to most listeners. Removing weight requires effort. Accumulation feels like progress. Reduction feels like loss, even when it is not. Diogenes understood something that modern finance often avoids. Growth without restraint does not create security. It creates dependency. Dependency creates fear. Fear ensures obedience. The cup, in hindsight, was a test. Could he let go of something useful without resentment? Could he surrender convenience without bitterness? Most people cannot. They cling not because they need, but because letting go would admit they were mistaken about what mattered. This is why minimalism feels threatening. It challenges past decisions. It asks you to face sunk costs honestly. Diogenes had no sunk costs left. He burned them all. Athens, however, was drowning in them. Every citizen invested in reputation. Every family invested in appearances. Every philosopher invested in being seen as wise. These investments required constant upkeep, and upkeep is labor. Diogenes labored very little. His days were simple. Observe, speak, eat, sleep. He conserved energy not through laziness, but through precision. Energy spent defending image is energy stolen from life. Translate this into modern financial language. How much of your effort goes into maintaining alignment with expectations that no longer serve you? Upgrading possessions to keep pace, staying in roles to preserve narratives, holding investments because selling would admit error. The cup represents all of it. Small decisions compounded into invisible prisons. Diogenes showed that freedom does not arrive when income exceeds desire. It arrives when desire falls below income. Most people chase the first because the second requires honesty. He was often asked why he chose such a harsh life. His response was consistent. It was not harsh. It was light. The harshness came from comparison, from imagining alternatives, from believing you deserved more than what sustained you. There is a profound financial implication here. Comparison inflates desire. Inflated desire raises required income. Raised income increases vulnerability to market swings, job loss, illness, and time scarcity. This is how abundance creates fragility. Diogenes lived beneath comparison. He stepped outside the social ledger entirely. No scoreboard. No ranking. No accumulation race. His value was internal and therefore stable. This is why powerful men tolerated him, but never embraced him. You cannot build an empire on sufficiency. Empires require dissatisfaction. They require people to feel perpetually behind. Diogenes was ahead precisely because he refused the race. Near the end of his life, when asked how he wished to be buried, Diogenes reportedly said to throw his body outside the city walls. When someone objected, saying animals would devour him, he replied that then he should be given a stick to drive them away. When asked how he would use the stick if dead, he smiled and said that if he felt nothing, neither should he care. This is not morbidity. It is consistency. He extended detachment beyond life itself. Nothing to defend. Nothing to preserve. Nothing to fear. And yet, this man influenced generations of thinkers, from Stoics to modern minimalists. Not through writings, but through example. The cup fell, and the echo traveled centuries. You may not throw away your belongings tomorrow. That is not the lesson. The lesson is to identify which possessions are silently owning you. Every object is a contract. Some serve you. Some extract from you. Diogenes canceled all but the essential ones. The question he leaves us with is not whether you can live with less. It is whether you dare to discover how much less is enough. When Diogenes finally approached the end of his life, there was no grand reckoning, no dramatic reversal, no hidden regret waiting in the shadows. This alone makes his story rare. Most lives, when stripped at the end, reveal attachments people thought they had transcended. Diogenes remained consistent. Consistency, not purity, was his true achievement. By then, his presence had become almost mythic. Children were warned about him. Philosophers argued about him. Rulers referenced him half in jest, half in fear. He had become a living counterexample to everything society quietly agreed upon. And yet, Diogenes never claimed victory over the world. He simply stepped aside from it. This is an important distinction. He did not try to reform Athens. He did not organize followers. He did not design a system meant to scale. Systems require maintenance. Movements attract corruption. Diogenes chose a path that could not be hijacked because it was internal. The cup, when seen from a distance, was not a rejection of objects. It was a declaration of independence from escalation. Once something works, adding more does not always improve it. Often, it weakens it. Modern finance suffers from the same blindness. Complexity is mistaken for sophistication. More accounts, more strategies, more layers, more leverage. Each addition promises control. Each one quietly introduces fragility. Diogenes refused complexity, not because he was incapable of it, but because he understood its cost. He understood something most never learn. The most dangerous expense is the one you normalize. The cup was normalized. It felt harmless. And that is why it mattered. Think of your own life again, without defensiveness. Not everything must go, but everything must justify its existence, not emotionally, functionally. Does it genuinely increase your resilience, or does it simply increase your standard of comfort? Comfort is not evil. But when comfort becomes non-negotiable, it becomes a leash. Diogenes had no leash. There is a quiet cruelty in modern narratives of success. They promise freedom through accumulation while delivering dependency through maintenance. More space to clean, more possessions to ensure, more income required to stand still. This is not wealth. It is motion without progress. Diogenes inverted the equation. He reduced required income so drastically that freedom arrived automatically. No negotiation, no waiting, no conditions. This is why his philosophy unsettles people, even today. It offers no dopamine, no future fantasy, no payoff later. It says freedom is available now, but only if you are willing to release what you thought you needed. The child at the river was not enlightened. He was simply unconditioned. Diogenes recognized in him a state most adults spend fortunes trying to reclaim. And here lies the final lesson of the cup. The goal is not to become extreme. The goal is to become intentional. To know, precisely, where enough lies for you. To stop confusing expansion with improvement. Wealth, when stripped to its essence, is the ability to meet life without panic. To respond rather than react. To move when necessary, and remain still when not. Everything else is ornament. Diogenes died as he lived. Light, unencumbered, unafraid. He left no estate, no debts, no instructions. And yet, he left behind a challenge that refuses to age. What in your life could disappear tomorrow without truly harming you? What remains after that is your real foundation. The cup shattered civilization not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed how much of civilization rests on things no one truly needs. Power announces itself loudly. True freedom rarely does. The day Alexander came to see Diogenes, the city felt different before anyone understood why. Rumors move faster than armies, and this one arrived like a change in the air. Alexander of Macedon had entered Athens, not as a conqueror, but as a legend still breathing. Young, undefeated, carrying the weight of the world's future like a crown already welded to his skull. Where Alexander walked, the ground seemed to lean toward him. Soldiers followed. Advisors whispered. Citizens gathered, rehearsing admiration. Every man adjusted his posture when his shadow passed, as if greatness were contagious and might be absorbed through proximity. Alexander had everything Diogenes did not. Titles, armies, territory, ambition sharpened into destiny. And yet, for reasons even he may not have fully understood, Alexander sought out the man in the jar. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps irritation, or perhaps, beneath the armor and prophecy, there was a quiet anxiety Alexander could not name. He had conquered cities, but peace had not arrived. He had accumulated power, yet the hunger remained. They found Diogenes resting in the sun, unmoved by the commotion. He did not rise. He did not bow. He did not perform recognition. He simply squinted, annoyed that something had interrupted the warmth on his face. Alexander stood before him, the axis of history pausing for a breath. The exchange is recorded simply, almost insultingly so, given its magnitude. Alexander introduced himself, as if Diogenes might not know, as if the world had not been shouting his name for years. Then came the offer. "Anything you want," Alexander said. "Ask, and it will be granted." This was not generosity. It was dominance disguised as kindness. The assumption was embedded in the gesture. Everyone wants something. Everyone can be bought, rewarded, elevated. Desire is the universal language of control. Diogenes looked up, shielding his eyes. "Stand out of my sunlight. No speech, no gratitude, no rebellion. Just an observation. A request that reduced the most powerful man alive to an inconvenience between a philosopher and the sun." The crowd froze. Advisors stiffened. Soldiers waited for offense to bloom into punishment. This was how the world worked. Disrespect demanded correction. Alexander laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was incomprehensible. In that moment, he glimpsed something he could not conquer. A man who needed nothing from him. Later, Alexander would say that if he were not Alexander, he would wish to be Diogenes. Most hear this as humility. It is not. It is confession. Alexander sensed the asymmetry immediately. He had power over cities, but none over this man. Diogenes had no power over armies, yet Alexander's presence meant nothing to him. This imbalance haunted rulers long after. From a mythic perspective, this encounter is often framed as arrogance versus humility. That framing is shallow. What truly collided that day were two definitions of wealth. Alexander's wealth was external. It required constant expansion. Armies had to be fed, territories secured, rivals crushed before they grew. His life was motion without rest. Victory was temporary relief before the next hunger. Diogenes' wealth was internal. It required no defense, no growth, no maintenance. The sun rose. Hunger arrived. Hunger left. Nothing accumulated. Nothing decayed. And this is where the myth deepens. Alexander's empire would fracture within years of his death. Diogenes' gesture would echo for millennia. Ask yourself why. It is because systems built on acquisition collapse when expansion stops. Systems built on sufficiency do not require momentum to survive. In modern financial terms, Alexander represents maximum leverage, high burn rate, high fixed costs, endless growth assumptions. Diogenes represents minimal burn, zero leverage, independence from favorable conditions. Alexander needed the world to cooperate. Diogenes needed the sun. The unsettling realization for those watching was not that Diogenes was poor. It was that Alexander, for all his power, was dependent. Dependent on loyalty, on supply lines, on public belief in his myth, on tomorrow behaving as expected. Diogenes depended on nothing he could not replace with endurance. This is why power fears those who want less. Desire is the entry point. Remove it, and influence fails to land. The child at the river removed the cup. Diogenes removed the offer. Alexander stood there, suddenly aware that the entire machinery of empire had no currency this man would accept. This moment marks the transition from spectacle to principle, from story to law. Because once you understand why Diogenes could refuse Alexander, you begin to understand how many offers in your own life quietly own you. We will return to this encounter not as legend, but as instruction. Because what played out in that sunlight still governs negotiations, careers, markets, and freedom today. After Alexander left, the dust settled quickly. Empires move on. Philosophers remain. Yet something had shifted, not in Athens, but in the minds of those who witnessed the encounter. They had seen power hesitate. That alone was unprecedented. To understand why this moment matters beyond myth, we must examine Alexander more closely, not as a hero carved in marble, but as a man trapped inside momentum. Alexander was raised on prophecy. From childhood, he was told he was destined to rule. Aristotle himself shaped his mind, feeding him Homer, Achilles, the romance of glory. Desire was cultivated deliberately. To stop conquering would not have felt like rest. It would have felt like death. This is the first philosophical layer. Desire, when fused with identity, becomes a prison. You no longer pursue goals. You must obey them. Alexander's life required escalation. Each victory raised expectations. Each conquest demanded another. His wealth, power, and influence were real, but they were not stable. They were kinetic. Stop moving, and everything collapses inward. Diogenes, by contrast, had stripped identity down to function. He was not a philosopher because he was called one. He was not poor because he lacked possessions. He was simply a human responding to needs as they arose. This difference is subtle, but absolute. One life depended on narrative. The other depended on reality. In finance, narrative is dangerous. It inflates value beyond fundamentals. It justifies leverage. It creates fragility disguised as confidence. Markets run on this illusion constantly. Prices detach from utility. Assets trade on belief rather than substance. Eventually, gravity returns. Alexander's empire was a narrative. Diogenes' life was fundamental. When Diogenes asked Alexander to move, he was not insulting him. He was unconsciously enforcing a boundary. You may be powerful, but you may not interfere with what sustains me. That boundary is the root of sovereignty. Most people never establish it. They allow income to dictate identity. They allow employers, clients, markets, and trends to step into their sunlight. Slowly, their needs expand until saying no feels impossible. This is how dependence is built, not through coercion, but through convenience and aspiration. Diogenes had already dismantled aspiration. He had trained himself to want nothing beyond what arrived naturally. This made him immune not only to Alexander, but to every lesser form of pressure. Consider modern negotiations. The party who needs the deal loses. The party who can walk away sets the terms. This is not arrogance. It is structural truth. Diogenes could walk away from everything because he had already walked away from wanting it. Alexander could not. His entire life was an unbroken chain of obligations to his destiny. He could not rest in the sun without the weight of the world pressing down on him. Here is the uncomfortable financial lesson. Freedom is not determined by how much you earn, but by how many options you can refuse without fear. Most people measure wealth by acquisition. Diogenes measured it by refusal. What offers currently control your behavior? A salary that justifies tolerating erosion of time. A lifestyle that demands continuous income. A reputation that requires constant performance. These are not inherently wrong. But when they cannot be declined, they are not choices. Diogenes understood that power operates through need. He severed need at the root. Alexander sensed this instinctively, which is why he respected the man he could not dominate. There is a lesser-known anecdote. Alexander once asked Diogenes if he feared him. Diogenes replied by asking whether Alexander was a good man or a bad one. When Alexander said he was good, Diogenes asked why he should fear a good man. When Alexander hesitated, the implication was clear. Fear relies on unpredictability and attachment. Diogenes had neither. This is not bravery. It is alignment. When nothing external defines your worth, threats lose their meaning. Financial independence is often framed as escape from work. That is shallow. True independence is escape from coercion. It is the ability to remain calm when offers are withdrawn or threats are issued. Alexander offered everything because that is how his world worked. Diogenes declined effortlessly because his world required nothing extra. The sunlight continued to fall on his face long after Alexander left, and in that stillness, a law revealed itself. The fewer things you need, the fewer people can command you. We are not finished with Alexander yet. His empire will teach us what happens when expansion meets exhaustion. Alexander would leave Athens soon after that encounter, drawn onward by the gravity of his own legend. Asia awaited. Persia beckoned. The world still had edges to be erased. Diogenes remained where he was, unmoved, as if nothing of consequence had occurred. And yet, what followed would reveal which of the two lives was truly fragile. Alexander's empire expanded faster than any before it. Cities fell in rapid succession. Treasuries were emptied. Titles multiplied. His wealth became abstract, measured not in coins, but in dominion. And with each conquest, the machinery of empire grew heavier. Supply lines stretched thin. Generals grew ambitious. Soldiers grew tired. Victory demanded constant motion, because stopping meant facing the structure he had built without movement to distract from its cracks. This is the hidden cost of acquisition that history rarely emphasizes. Growth creates obligations faster than it creates stability. Every new territory must be governed. Every new asset must be defended. Every new expectation must be fulfilled. Alexander did not die poor. He died overextended. He was 32 years old when his body finally failed him in Babylon. The cause is debated. Fever, poison, exhaustion. What is not debated is the aftermath. The empire shattered almost immediately. Generals turned on one another. Borders dissolved. The world Alexander had assembled could not stand without his relentless will holding it together. Contrast this with Diogenes. When Diogenes died, there was nothing to divide, no wealth to fight over, no followers to manipulate, no system to collapse. His life required no successor. It was complete as it was. This contrast reveals the final philosophical layer of the encounter in the sunlight. Lives built on accumulation require constant management. Lives built on sufficiency are self-sustaining. In financial terms, Alexander's strategy relied on perpetual expansion. Diogenes' relied on margin of safety. One assumes tomorrow must be bigger. The other assumes tomorrow may be worse and prepares accordingly. Modern economies reward Alexander behavior. Scale, speed, leverage, dominance. But they punish it ruthlessly when conditions change. Recessions expose leverage. Crises expose dependency. Those with high fixed costs break first. Diogenes lived with almost no fixed costs. This is where the lesson becomes practical. Every recurring expense in your life is a miniature army you must feed. Every obligation is a supply line vulnerable to disruption. When income falters, stress spikes not because needs are unmet, but because structures are threatened. Most people experience financial anxiety not from poverty, but from complexity. Diogenes eliminated complexity at the source. He understood that wealth without resilience is theater, impressive until the stage collapses. The ability to say no is the most underpriced asset in any economy. No to bad deals. No to draining commitments. No to lifestyles that require constant compromise. This ability is not granted by income alone. It is granted by low dependency. Alexander could not say no to conquest. His identity forbade it. Diogenes could say no to the world because his identity demanded nothing. Ask yourself this honestly. If your income stopped tomorrow, how many days would it take before fear entered your decisions? That number measures your leverage over your own life. This is not an argument for withdrawal. It is an argument for design. To consciously lower the threshold at which peace is possible. To identify what is essential and let the rest negotiate its place honestly. Diogenes did not reject wealth out of virtue. He rejected fragility. He saw that the more you need the future to cooperate, the more power the future holds over you. Alexander chased immortality through conquest. Diogenes achieved it through example. One life ended with an empire dissolving into dust. The other ended with a sentence that still stops powerful men mid-step. Stand out of my sunlight. That sentence is not defiance. It is clarity. It is the sound of a man who has nothing to defend and therefore nothing to fear. And in the quiet that follows, the financial law reveals itself fully. Wealth is not what you accumulate. It is what you cannot be forced to give up. Seneca understood wealth long before it ever tested him. Long before exile, long before proximity to emperors, long before his name became synonymous with stoic calm, Seneca was already studying the most unstable substance in human life: fortune. He did not trust it, not because he despised wealth, but because he saw how quickly it turned from servant to master. Rome, in Seneca's time, was a city swollen with excess. Marble villas rose where wooden homes once stood. Banquets stretched through the night while provinces bled to fund them. Wealth flowed fast, unevenly, and without apology. To be rich in Rome was not merely to have money. It was to perform dominance publicly. Seneca performed it better than most. He was one of the richest men in the empire. A lender, an advisor, a statesman. His estates were vast. His influence reached the ear of emperors. He wore the robes, spoke the language, played the game. And yet, behind closed doors, he practiced something that would seem irrational to his peers. He rehearsed being poor. At regular intervals, Seneca deliberately stripped his life down. He ate coarse bread, slept on hard surfaces, wore rough clothing. He lived, temporarily, as though fortune had abandoned him entirely. And during these periods, he would ask himself a single question: is this what I feared? This practice was not symbolic. It was strategic. Seneca understood that fear does not come from loss itself, but from unfamiliarity with loss. What the mind has never experienced, it exaggerates. What it exaggerates, it obeys. Most people are wealthy in imagination and poor in preparation. They picture catastrophe endlessly, but never train for it. When it arrives, panic takes control. Seneca refused to let panic be an option. There is a passage in his letters where he writes that one should live for a few days as if one's worst fears have already happened. Not to suffer, but to discover that the suffering is survivable. This is prepared poverty. The voluntary encounter with deprivation before it is forced upon you. Diogenes removed desire entirely. Seneca took a different path. He kept wealth, but he weakened its grip. This distinction matters. Where Diogenes achieved immunity through subtraction, Seneca achieved resilience through rehearsal. Rome was not kind to those who appeared weak. Power shifted violently. Emperors rose and fell through paranoia and bloodshed. Seneca himself would be exiled, recalled, elevated, and eventually ordered to die by Nero, the very man he had tutored. And yet, throughout these violent oscillations, Seneca remained composed, not because he was detached from life, but because he had already imagined its loss. This is the philosophical core. Detachment is not indifference. It is familiarity. When the mind knows it can endure, fear loses its leverage. From a financial perspective, this is where most modern advice fails. It encourages optimization without inoculation. Maximize returns. Increase lifestyle. Scale consumption. But it rarely asks whether the individual can psychologically withstand reversal. High income without emotional preparedness is not wealth. It is exposure. Seneca's fortune made him powerful, but his preparedness made him free. He did not confuse the two. There is a rumor, rarely emphasized, that Seneca kept his wealth partially liquid not merely for convenience, but because he distrusted permanence. He understood that assets tied too tightly to systems become traps when those systems falter. Rome would eventually fall. Seneca knew this. Not in detail, but in principle. All concentrations of power collapse eventually. The only question is whether the individual collapses with them. Prepared poverty is the answer to that question. When you practice living with less, you lower your psychological burn rate. You discover which comforts are optional and which are essential. This clarity is invaluable. It transforms fear into data. Imagine, quietly, removing half of what you rely on today. Not permanently, temporarily. Which losses sting? Which barely register? The difference reveals where your freedom actually lives. Seneca did not reject wealth because he understood its utility. He rejected dependence because he understood its cost. In this way, he stands between Diogenes and Alexander. He walked the world of power without surrendering his inner sovereignty. He played the game, but he trained himself to survive its end. The myth of Seneca is not that he was calm. It is that his calm was engineered. And in that engineering lies a financial lesson far more practical than any promise of endless growth. Prepare for loss before loss prepares you. Seneca's calm was not accidental. It was rehearsed in private, far from the marble halls where power performed itself loudly. And this is where his philosophy becomes unsettling, because it exposes a truth most people avoid. Security is not created by accumulation. It is created by familiarity with absence. Rome feared poverty more than death. To fall from status was to become invisible. Former friends crossed the street. Doors closed without explanation. The city did not forgive those who lost favor. Seneca knew this intimately because he watched it happen to others long before it happened to him. This is why his practice was so radical. He did not wait for exile to discover what exile felt like. He simulated it. He did not wait for loss to teach him humility. He practiced it while powerful. During these periods of voluntary austerity, Seneca paid close attention to his thoughts. He noticed how quickly the mind dramatized discomfort, how easily it whispered that this state was intolerable, permanent, catastrophic. And then he watched those thoughts dissolve as the days passed and nothing truly broke. Hunger did not kill him. Simple clothing did not erase his dignity. Hard sleep did not strip him of intellect. The world did not end. This realization weakened fear at its root. Fear, when examined closely, is rarely about pain. It is about identity. Who am I if this disappears? What am I worth without this symbol? Seneca dismantled these questions by confronting them deliberately, before they could corner him in crisis. There is a lesser-known letter where Seneca warns Lucilius that luxury is most dangerous when it feels deserved. Entitlement hardens desire into expectation. Expectation, once violated, produces rage or despair. Seneca wanted neither. Prepared poverty was his antidote. In financial terms, this is emotional hedging, not diversification of assets, but diversification of identity. When your sense of self depends on income, title, or lifestyle, market volatility becomes existential threat. When identity is portable, volatility becomes inconvenience. Most people build lives that require consistency to remain calm. Seneca built a mind that remained calm regardless of conditions. This distinction explains why wealth amplifies anxiety for some and reduces it for others. Money does not create peace. It reveals preparedness. Those untrained in loss feel every fluctuation as danger. Those familiar with simplicity experience fluctuation as noise. Seneca did not romanticize poverty. He did not glorify suffering. He understood its purpose as training. Just as soldiers drill before battle, he drilled before misfortune, and misfortune came. Exile stripped him of power. Court politics turned against him. Accusations followed. Then came recall, renewed favor, greater wealth than before. Through all of it, Seneca remained internally unchanged. This is the mark of genuine philosophy. External shifts do not produce internal chaos. Modern financial culture discourages this stability. It celebrates optimism without resilience, confidence without contingency. The language of perpetual growth dominates, leaving individuals psychologically naked when growth stalls. Prepared poverty restores balance. It says, quietly, even if everything collapses, I remain. Consider how few people can say that honestly. This is why Seneca advised regular encounters with simplicity. Not once. Repeatedly. Repetition trains the nervous system. The first time feels uncomfortable. The second feels manageable. The third feels familiar. Fear evaporates through exposure. The financial application is clear but uncomfortable. Design periods where your lifestyle intentionally contracts, not to save money, but to save sanity. Eat simply. Reduce consumption. Cancel non-essential comforts temporarily. Observe what truly matters. What remains after contraction is your core. Everything else is negotiable. Seneca understood that wealth without this knowledge becomes tyranny. You serve what you fear losing. He refused to serve his fortune. This is the quiet power of prepared poverty. It grants you the ability to negotiate with life from a position of calm rather than desperation, to say no without panic, to endure without resentment. Diogenes discarded the cup permanently. Seneca picked it up, put it down, and proved he did not need it. Both paths lead to freedom, one through renunciation, one through rehearsal. The common thread is this: you must meet your fears voluntarily, or they will meet you involuntarily. When the order finally came, it was delivered without ceremony. Seneca was told to die. Nero, once his student, now emperor, had grown fearful of shadows. Power, when unprepared for loss, turns paranoid. Seneca was accused of complicity in a plot. Whether true or convenient no longer mattered. In Rome, accusation was often sentence enough. Those who witnessed Seneca's final hours expected drama, pleading, rage, denial. Instead, they saw something far more unsettling: calm. He opened his veins as custom required, speaking gently to his companions, consoling them, not himself. His words did not sound like resignation. They sounded practiced, as if he had been here before. In a way, he had. This moment was not new territory. Seneca had visited it many times in his mind. He had already imagined loss of wealth, exile, disgrace, and death itself. By the time fate arrived, it found no panic waiting. This is the ultimate proof of prepared poverty. Not that one can endure discomfort, but that one can face the irreversible without collapse. Seneca's wealth had not saved him. His philosophy had. The tragedy of his life is not that he died by imperial command. Many did. The tragedy would have been if he had lived in fear until that moment. He did not. He had already stripped fear of its teeth. Contrast this with Nero. Nero ruled the known world and slept poorly. He surrounded himself with guards, flatterers, and distractions. He indulged endlessly, yet remained unsatisfied. Every threat felt existential because his identity was welded to control. Losing power meant losing himself. Seneca had prepared for losing everything. Nero had prepared for nothing. This contrast reveals the final financial truth of prepared poverty. Wealth that cannot be lost peacefully is not wealth. It is liability. In modern terms, consider how many people would unravel if their income stopped, not because they would starve, but because their identity would. Careers, lifestyles, social circles, self-worth all tied to cash flow. When cash flow falters, panic rushes in to fill the void. Prepared poverty dissolves this fragility. It does not ask you to abandon ambition. It asks you to disarm fear, to ensure that no single variable holds your emotional hostage. When you know you can survive with less, you stop making decisions from desperation. This changes everything. You negotiate better. You invest more rationally. You resist lifestyle inflation not out of discipline, but indifference. You choose work based on meaning and leverage rather than fear of falling behind. Seneca's final lesson is not about death. It is about optionality. Optionality is the ability to endure unfavorable outcomes without panic. Markets reward optionality. Life rewards it even more. Those who can wait, who can endure downturns, who can absorb loss without unraveling, accumulate advantages quietly over time. Most people chase upside. Seneca trained for downside. This is why his philosophy endures. Not because it promises happiness, but because it offers stability. And stability is the soil in which true wealth grows. Prepared poverty is not asceticism. It is insurance, not against loss of money, but against loss of self. When Seneca died, Rome lost a philosopher. The world gained a mirror. It asks you one final question, whispered rather than shouted. If everything you rely on disappeared, who would you be? And would that person still be enough? When Rome fell, it did not collapse in a single night. It eroded, roads cracked, aqueducts dried, laws lost authority. Armies that once guarded borders became mercenaries, then bandits. The world did not end in fire. It ended in noise, confusion, and forgetting. Libraries burned not because someone hated knowledge, but because no one remembered why it mattered. And in the middle of this slow unraveling, something unlikely survived: silence. High in the hills and hidden valleys of Europe, far from collapsing cities and shouting markets, small communities formed around an idea so unfashionable it was almost invisible. Stability. Not dominance. Not expansion. Stability. At the center of this quiet resistance stood a man who never intended to change the world. Benedict of Nursia was born into privilege. He was sent to Rome to study rhetoric, law, and the art of advancement. And there, in the heart of what was left of empire, he saw something that disturbed him more than barbarian invasions ever could. He saw a civilization addicted to stimulation and incapable of restraint. Rome was still rich in form, but poor in spirit. Pleasure without purpose. Education without discipline. Wealth without order. Benedict did not protest. He withdrew. He left Rome quietly, retreating first into solitude, then into community. What he created was not a philosophy in the abstract, but a system for surviving collapse without becoming savage. The rule of Saint Benedict was not mystical poetry. It was operational. Pray, work, eat simply, sleep regularly, speak little, own nothing individually. These were not religious gestures. They were technologies of resilience. The monasteries that followed Benedict were deliberately boring. No excess decoration, no indulgent feasts, no constant novelty. Time was structured, repetitive, almost monotonous. To modern minds, this sounds like deprivation. To collapsing civilizations, it was salvation. While cities disintegrated, monasteries stabilized. While trade routes vanished, monasteries grew food. While literacy declined, monks copied texts by candlelight, page by page, without applause, without urgency. Knowledge survived not because it was exciting, but because it was quietly preserved. This is the mythic layer. When noise dominated, silence endured. But beneath the story lies a deeper principle. Benedictine life was built around intentional limitation. The monk did not own tools. The monastery did. The monk did not chase status. Roles rotated. The monk did not pursue pleasure. Pleasure was integrated modestly and predictably. In financial terms, this was a radical rejection of individual accumulation in favor of systemic durability. Monasteries did not collapse when individuals died. They did not fragment when leaders changed. Their wealth was not concentrated in ambition, but distributed across routine. Each day looked much like the last, and that sameness became their strength. Contrast this with Rome's elite. Wealth concentrated, lifestyles escalated, expectations inflated. When disruption arrived, the system snapped. Benedictine communities survived because they had low variance. Their needs were simple, their routines predictable, their consumption restrained, their identity anchored in process, not outcome. This is where the philosophical insight emerges. Stability outperforms brilliance over long horizons. Modern finance celebrates innovation, disruption, growth. Benedictine life celebrated continuity, not because change is evil, but because too much change without structure destroys memory. Memory is capital. The monasteries became economic engines not by chasing profit, but by eliminating waste. They produced surplus food because they did not overconsume. They accumulated land because they did not speculate. They gained trust because they were predictable. Over centuries, monasteries became some of the largest landholders in Europe, not through conquest, but through patience. Nobles donated land seeking spiritual favor. Farmers sought protection. Knowledge seekers found refuge. Wealth arrived quietly, as it always does when it is not chased. Here is the uncomfortable financial lesson. Systems designed for endurance outperform systems designed for excitement. Low burn, low noise. High discipline beats high burn. High stimulation, constant optimization. The monk did not need motivation. He had routine. He did not need inspiration. He had structure. He did not need constant reward. He had sufficiency. Ask yourself this: how much of your financial stress comes not from scarcity, but from volatility, from income that fluctuates wildly, from expenses that scale without intention, from habits that require constant novelty to feel alive. Benedictine life removed volatility at the source. By limiting desire, they limited exposure. By standardizing life, they stabilized emotion. By lowering expectations, they raised endurance. In a world addicted to growth, the monasteries grew by standing still. This is not romantic nostalgia. It is strategic design. The monasteries did not survive the Dark Ages by accident. They survived because they were built for darkness. They assumed instability. They planned for it. They did not require ideal conditions to function. That assumption is the core of wealth that lasts. As we move deeper into this chapter, we will uncover how silence, routine, and restraint became one of the most powerful economic strategies in Western history, and why modern lives, filled with noise and choice, are often poorer because of it. To understand why the monasteries endured, you must understand what they refused. They refused excess choice. Choice feels like freedom until it becomes noise. Rome collapsed under the weight of endless options. Political factions multiplied. Loyalties shifted. Morals bent with convenience. Every man negotiated reality daily, and negotiation is exhausting. Benedictine life eliminated negotiation almost entirely. The bell rang. You rose. You worked. You prayed. You ate. You slept. The order did not change based on mood, ambition, or fear. This constancy was not oppression. It was relief. Modern minds struggle with this. We assume discipline limits creativity. In truth, discipline preserves energy. When fewer decisions are required, attention deepens. When attention deepens, mastery emerges quietly. The monks became masters not because they chased excellence, but because they repeated fundamentals relentlessly. Agriculture improved. Brewing advanced. Architecture stabilized. Timekeeping refined. These innovations did not come from disruption. They came from patience. There is a little discussed fact about Benedictine monasteries. Many of Europe's earliest banks grew out of them, not because monks sought finance, but because people trusted them. Trust is the rarest currency during collapse, and trust compounds faster than interest. Why were they trusted? Because they were predictable. Because they did not chase profit. Because their lives did not depend on growth. They could say no. This is the philosophical law beneath the myth. Independence from escalation creates credibility. In financial terms, monasteries had extremely low burn rates. Their consumption was capped by rule, not impulse. Their surplus was real surplus, not debt disguised as comfort. This allowed them to store grain during good years and distribute it during famine. While cities starved, monasteries fed. People remember who feeds them when systems fail. Notice the inversion. The monks did not pursue influence. Influence arrived because they were stable when others were volatile. Modern individuals often do the opposite. They design lives that require constant expansion to remain emotionally balanced. More income to offset more spending. More stimulation to offset more boredom. More certainty to offset more fear. This creates a fragile equilibrium that shatters under stress. The monasteries rejected equilibrium entirely. They embraced asymmetry, low needs, high patience, slow accumulation. This asymmetry is the essence of financial resilience. Consider the modern investor who panics at market downturns. Why? Because their lifestyle assumes uninterrupted growth. Their identity assumes constant validation. Loss feels existential. The monk did not panic during famine because famine had been rehearsed. Scarcity was not foreign. Prepared poverty reappears here, but at scale. The Benedictine rule institutionalized what Diogenes embodied and Seneca rehearsed. Lower desire. Normalize simplicity. Make endurance boring. This boredom is misunderstood. It is not emptiness. It is depth without distraction. Silence allowed monks to hear patterns others missed. Seasons, soil, time, human behavior. While cities reacted, monasteries observed. Observation creates advantage. There is a financial parallel rarely taught. The best decisions are made in quiet. Noise forces reaction. Silence allows response. How many of your financial choices are made under noise, market headlines, social comparison, lifestyle advertising, peer pressure disguised as progress? This noise inflates urgency and distorts judgment. The monastery eliminated noise by design. No advertising, no competition, no status signaling, no escalation, just continuity. Over generations, this continuity produced wealth that did not look like wealth. Land accumulated slowly. Knowledge centralized. Skills compounded. By the time Europe stabilized, monasteries controlled vast resources without ever appearing aggressive. They won by not playing the same game. This is the lesson modern life resists most fiercely. You do not need to outcompete everyone. You need to outlast instability. Silence is not passive. It is strategic. As the world outside burned, monks copied manuscripts by candlelight. When peace returned, those manuscripts became the foundation of universities, law, medicine, and science. Wealth followed knowledge. Always does. But knowledge survived only because someone protected it from noise. Your own life contains noise that does not serve you. Endless updates, constant comparison, reactive decisions. Each one siphons energy and increases volatility. The Benedictine answer is not withdrawal from society. It is the creation of inner monasteries, structured routines, capped desires, predictable rhythms, low burn rates, quiet accumulation. This is how wealth survives centuries. By the time Europe began to remember itself, the monasteries were already waiting. Kings returned to thrones. Cities rebuilt walls. Trade routes reopened. And when the world searched for what had been lost, it did not find it in palaces or ruins. It found it in quiet rooms where men had been copying, planting, measuring, and waiting. This is the final truth of Benedictine wealth. It was not created during peace. It was created during neglect. While others fought to preserve power, monks preserved process. While rulers chased control, monasteries cultivated continuity. And continuity, over long time horizons, outperforms domination. There is a temptation to see this as religious exceptionalism. It is not. It is systems thinking. The monasteries functioned as low-noise, low-leverage, high-redundancy organisms. If one monk failed, the routine remained. If one harvest failed, stores existed. If one leader died, the rule continued. Compare this to modern organizations built around charisma, speed, and constant innovation. When the visionary leaves, collapse follows. When growth slows, panic spreads. When attention fades, identity dissolves. Benedict removed personality from the center. He replaced it with rhythm. This is profoundly uncomfortable for modern individuals because we are trained to believe meaning comes from differentiation, from standing out, from being exceptional. The monastery taught the opposite. Meaning comes from being reliable. Reliability is the quietest form of power. Financially, reliability attracts capital without asking. People trust what does not surprise them. Investors trust companies with predictable cash flow more than flashy stories. Communities trust institutions that remain steady during crisis. Individuals trust partners who do not change with every wind. The monasteries became financial anchors, not because they promised returns, but because they removed uncertainty. Uncertainty is the true cost most people underestimate. Noise creates uncertainty. Constant novelty creates uncertainty. Escalation creates uncertainty. The Benedictine solution was radical consistency. Even prayer followed the same hours each day. Even meals followed the same pattern. Even speech was restrained. Not because variation is evil, but because too much variation erodes attention. And attention is the resource that compounds everything else. Look at your own life through this lens. Where does unpredictability drain you? Where do you feel constantly on edge, waiting for the next demand, the next expense, the next shift? That edge is not ambition. It is volatility. Wealth seeks low volatility environments. The monasteries created such environments deliberately, and in doing so, they attracted not only resources, but people seeking refuge from chaos. Scholars, farmers, travelers, refugees. Each arrival added value without destabilizing the system, because the system was designed to absorb variation without changing its core. This is the final financial lesson of silence. Design systems that can accept stress without requiring redesign. Most lives are built the opposite way. Small disruptions force emotional overhauls. A bad month triggers panic. A missed goal triggers identity crisis. This fragility is expensive. Benedictine life did not eliminate hardship. It eliminated surprise. When hardship arrived, it was met with familiarity rather than fear. The monk did not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" He asked, "What is required now?" This shift alone transforms decision-making. It removes drama. It preserves energy. In modern finance, drama is costly. Emotional decisions destroy capital faster than market movements ever could. Silence protects against this not by numbing feeling, but by slowing reaction. The world today is louder than Rome ever was. Information arrives faster than reflection can keep up. Consumption is encouraged not for satisfaction, but for stimulation. And stimulation creates dependency. The monasteries offer a counter-design. Not a rejection of progress, but a refusal to let progress dictate pace. Not an escape from society, but insulation from its excesses. You do not need stone walls or vows. You need structure. You need limits. You need silence. Silence is where fear loses momentum. Silence is where clarity emerges. Silence is where wealth stops leaking through unseen cracks. The monks did not save civilization because they were brilliant. They saved it because they were consistent, and consistency, over centuries, becomes legacy. As we leave the hills and valleys of the monasteries, we move next into a different kind of discipline, one forged not in silence, but in combat. A man who carried nothing, not because he withdrew from the world, but because he refused to be slowed by it. Miyamoto Musashi did not look like a legend. Those who met him late in life described a man unkempt, dressed plainly, sometimes even carelessly. His hair was often uncombed. His clothes were worn, functional, unremarkable. He carried no banners, claimed no titles, lived without a permanent home. And yet, when his name was spoken, seasoned warriors grew quiet. Japan in Musashi's time was obsessed with form, lineage, schools, technique catalogs, elaborate armor lacquered to intimidate before steel ever met flesh. Swordsmanship had become ritualized, aesthetic, almost theatrical. Musashi cut through all of it the same way he cut through men, directly. He fought his first duel at 13, not with refined technique, not with elegant footwork, but with brutality and instinct. His opponent was older, trained, confident. Musashi killed him anyway. That victory did not elevate Musashi into society. It exiled him from it. From that moment on, his life became a long road without attachment. He wandered, village to village, school to school, challenging masters not out of arrogance, but out of refusal to submit to inherited authority. Many of these duels were not ceremonial. They were lethal, and Musashi survived them all. Over 60 times. The myth focuses on his invincibility. The deeper truth lies in how he lived between battles. Musashi owned almost nothing. He slept where he could, ate simply, carried few possessions, sometimes none at all. This was not romantic poverty. It was deliberate mobility. Musashi understood something warriors learn faster than merchants. Weight slows you down. Attachments delay decisions. Comfort dulls reaction. In combat, hesitation kills. In life, it enslaves. Musashi refused to be slowed. There is a lesser-known detail often omitted in popular retellings. Musashi frequently arrived late to duels, not because he was careless, but because he understood psychology. His opponents waited, stewing in anxiety, rehearsing outcomes. Musashi arrived calm, having spent the time resting, observing, conserving energy. He did not rush because nothing waited for him elsewhere. This is the first philosophical layer. Urgency is often manufactured by attachment. When you have nowhere else, you must be. Time bends in your favor. Musashi's lack of possessions gave him an advantage modern minds rarely recognize. He had no life to return to, no reputation to preserve beyond the moment, no comfort waiting if he lost. Paradoxically, this made him more dangerous, not less. When you have nothing to protect, you fight without restraint. This principle extends far beyond combat. In financial negotiations, in careers, in personal boundaries, the one with less to lose has leverage. The one whose life is light can take risks, the burdened cannot. Musashi rejected formal schools because schools create loyalty. Loyalty creates obligation. Obligation creates compromise. He wanted none of it. Instead, he developed his own path. Niton Ichiryu, two heavens as one. Two swords wielded simultaneously, not to show off, but to solve a practical problem. One sword limited options. Two expanded them. This is important. Musashi did not reject tools. He rejected unnecessary ones. Every technique had to justify itself under pressure. If it failed in combat, it was discarded, regardless of tradition. Compare this to how most people live financially. Accumulating tools, subscriptions, strategies, identities, long after they stop serving. Keeping them because abandoning them would challenge the past. Musashi abandoned without nostalgia. He once wrote that you must not have preferences. This is often misunderstood. He did not mean you should feel nothing. He meant preference clouds judgment. When you prefer one outcome too strongly, you blind yourself to others. This is where minimalism becomes power. Not aesthetic simplicity, but cognitive clarity. Fewer attachments mean fewer distortions. Musashi's life was unstable by design. He expected uncertainty, slept expecting rain, ate expecting hunger. This expectation removed shock. When hardship arrived, it was not interruption. It was normal. This is the same principle we saw with Seneca, expressed through steel rather than letters. Prepared poverty in motion. By carrying little, Musashi increased his range. He could move when conditions changed. He could disengage when necessary. He could disappear entirely. No supply lines, no dependence, no fixed costs. In modern terms, Musashi lived with extreme optionality. Optionality is the ability to choose under pressure, to pivot without collapse, to survive unfavorable outcomes and remain dangerous afterward. Most people design lives that eliminate optionality in exchange for comfort. Musashi did the opposite. He sacrificed comfort to preserve freedom, and because of that, when the moment came, he was always ready. As we continue, we will see how this unburdened life translated not just into victory, but into philosophy. How Musashi distilled combat into principles that apply just as ruthlessly to money, power, and modern survival. Musashi's victories were not accidents of strength. They were the result of a mind that refused to cling. As his reputation spread, Challengers began to study him obsessively. They copied his stance, his timing, his rumored techniques. They tried to predict him, and they failed for the same reason every time. Musashi did not repeat himself. He understood something deeply unsettling to structured systems. Mastery is not repetition of form. It is responsiveness to reality. Schools taught kata, fixed sequences meant to preserve tradition. Musashi saw kata as fossils, useful for study, dangerous for combat. When the moment arrives, the enemy does not move according to your expectations. The ground is uneven. The light is wrong. The heart races. The mind clings. Musashi trained himself to let go of all that. There is an account of a duel on Ganryu Island that illustrates this more clearly than any treatise. His opponent, Sasaki Kojiro, was a celebrated swordsman, famous for his long blade and elegant technique. Kojiro arrived early, composed, rehearsed. Musashi arrived late, again. But this time, he arrived carrying something unexpected. A wooden sword. He had carved it hastily from an oar during the boat ride to the island. Rough, unpolished, longer than Kojiro's blade. This was not disrespect. It was adaptation. Musashi assessed the conditions. Wind direction, sun angle, distance. He chose a tool that fit the moment, not tradition. When the duel began, Kojiro was already off balance, insulted, emotionally invested. Musashi struck once. The fight ended. Kojiro died with a perfect sword in his hand. Musashi walked away with nothing added to his life. This moment is often romanticized as genius. The deeper truth is simpler. Musashi was not attached to the idea of how a duel should look. He was attached only to outcome. Attachment to form blinds you. Attachment to outcome sharpens you. This applies directly to finance. Investors cling to strategies because they once worked. Entrepreneurs cling to identities because they once paid. Employees cling to roles because they once provided security. When conditions change, these attachments become liabilities. Musashi abandoned form before it betrayed him. He did not seek honor in the conventional sense. He sought effectiveness. Honor, for him, was alignment with reality, not approval from others. This is why he often appeared crude, even rude. He did not polish his appearance because appearance invited expectation. Expectation invited distraction. Every signal you send creates pressure to maintain it. Musashi sent none. As he aged, he withdrew further from society, not out of bitterness, but refinement. He wrote, painted, reflected. The Book of Five Rings emerged not as theory, but distillation. Earth, water, fire, wind, void. Not elements, but states of engagement. Earth was foundation, stability, knowing your ground. In finance, this is your baseline, your minimum needs, your margin of safety. Water was adaptability, flow, taking shape of circumstance. In finance, this is liquidity, the ability to move when needed. Fire was decisive action, speed without hesitation. In finance, this is execution when opportunity appears. Wind was understanding others, their schools, their habits, their weaknesses. In finance, this is market psychology, knowing how others behave under pressure. And void. Void is where most misunderstand Musashi. Void is not emptiness. It is absence of attachment. The place where action arises without deliberation, where the mind does not cling to past success or future fear. Void is the state of the unburdened. This is the ultimate advantage of carrying nothing. When nothing is at stake emotionally, perception sharpens, reaction accelerates, fear evaporates. Musashi warned against loving weapons, against favoring one tool over another. Love creates blindness. Blindness invites defeat. Replace weapons with assets, careers, lifestyles. The lesson holds. When you fall in love with a strategy, you stop seeing when it no longer fits the terrain. When you fall in love with an asset, you ignore its decline. When you fall in love with an identity, you sacrifice adaptability. Musashi carried nothing because nothing deserved loyalty beyond the moment. This did not make him reckless. It made him precise. There is a false belief that security comes from accumulation. Musashi's life contradicts this. Security comes from readiness, from knowing you can move, fight, adapt, survive. The man who carries nothing is not poor. He is fast, and speed, in uncertain environments, is wealth. As we move into the final part of this chapter, we will see how Musashi's philosophy applies beyond battle, how unburdened living creates leverage not through force, but through clarity, and why, in a world obsessed with comfort, those who travel light quietly inherit the future. In the final years of his life, Musashi stopped fighting man and began fighting illusion. He withdrew into a cave called Reigondo, a place of stone, wind, and stillness. No banners marked it. No students gathered at its entrance. He chose it because it offered nothing to lean on. Cold nights, sparse food, silence thick enough to hear one's own impatience echo back. There, stripped even of the road, Musashi refined what he had lived instinctively for decades. Victory, he realized, was not the point. Freedom was. He had already proven he could win. 60 duels had settled that question. What remained was to understand why winning had been possible in the first place. The answer was not strength, not talent, not even courage. It was lack of attachment. Musashi wrote that the way is found in training. But training, for him, was not repetition. It was subtraction, removing habits, removing assumptions, removing the need to appear a certain way, removing fear of loss. He warned against developing taste. Taste narrows perception. When you prefer one style, one method, one outcome, you close yourself to what the moment actually requires. Most people live by taste. Preferred lifestyles, preferred income levels, preferred narratives about who they are. And when reality deviates, suffering begins. Musashi trained himself to have no preferred conditions. This is where his philosophy becomes financial, even if he never used such language. A life with low attachment has low volatility. Shocks do not cascade. Losses do not spiral. Decisions remain clear under pressure. Think of the modern equivalent. Someone whose expenses are minimal does not panic at job loss. Someone whose identity is not fused to status does not break when prestige fades. Someone who owns little can move, pivot, restart. Musashi lived this truth physically. He could disappear overnight. No property to sell. No reputation to defend in a specific place. No circle demanding continuity. His life was modular. Modularity is resilience. Most modern lives are the opposite. Highly integrated, highly optimized, highly fragile. One failure propagates everywhere. Income loss affects housing. Housing affects identity. Identity affects relationships. The collapse is not financial. It is systemic. Musashi designed against systemic collapse. He carried no excess, not because excess was sinful, but because excess slowed response time. In battle, delay is death. In finance, delay is opportunity lost or loss magnified. The unburdened act first because they are not negotiating with fear. Musashi's final teaching was simple and severe. Do nothing that is of no use, not morally, practically. Apply this brutally. How many things in your life consume energy without increasing resilience? How many habits exist because they once signaled success? How many commitments persist because removing them would be uncomfortable? These are modern burdens. They do not look like armor, but they restrict movement just the same. Musashi understood that comfort is seductive because it feels like safety. But comfort trains dependence. Dependence trains hesitation. Hesitation kills. This is not a call to live harshly. It is a call to live precisely. Precision is knowing exactly what you need and discarding the rest without resentment. Musashi did not romanticize struggle. He simply refused to anesthetize himself against reality. He stayed sharp by staying exposed. In financial life, exposure is often feared. Volatility, uncertainty, risk. But exposure combined with low dependency creates strength. Exposure with high dependency creates terror. The difference is not circumstance. It is design. Musashi's design was ruthless in its simplicity. Eat what sustains. Sleep when possible. Train constantly. Observe everything. Attach to nothing. In the cave, he wrote until his hand weakened. He painted until breath shortened. He left behind not wealth, but clarity. Not property, but instruction. When he died, there was no estate, no succession, no assets to fight over. And yet, his influence outlived clans, schools, and dynasties that once dismissed him as crude. Why? Because principles outlast possessions. The man who carried nothing into battle carried something far more valuable than armor or steel. He carried freedom of movement, freedom of mind, freedom from fear of loss. And that freedom made him unstoppable. This chapter leaves us with a hard question. In your own life, what slows you down? What do you carry not because it serves you, but because you have grown used to its weight? Because in the end, the battle is not against others. It is against attachment. And the one who carries nothing into that battle already stands ahead. Francis was not born a saint. He was born rich. Before the robes, before the barefoot sermons, before his name became synonymous with humility, he was the son of a successful cloth merchant in Assisi. His childhood was loud with laughter, wine, music, and ambition. Money moved easily in his world. So did dreams. Francis wanted glory, not God. He imagined himself a knight, armored and admired, carried forward by songs yet to be written. The ledgers of his father told a simple story. Buy low, sell high, expand trade, accumulate reputation. Francis understood this language fluently. He enjoyed spending money as much as earning it. Banquets, companions, generosity that impressed rather than sustained. He was not careless. He was intoxicated by momentum. Then, the momentum broke. Illness struck first. A long, quiet sickness that stripped him of appetite and certainty. Alone in bed, with no crowd to perform for, Francis discovered an unfamiliar sensation. Emptiness. Not the emptiness of hunger, but of direction. When he recovered, the world felt thinner. The pleasures that once dazzled him now echoed hollowly. Still, he tried to return to the old path. He joined a military expedition, seeking honor through battle. But on the road, far from home, something shifted again. A voice, or perhaps a thought he could no longer ignore, asked him who he was truly serving. The question lingered longer than the march. Francis turned back. This is often portrayed as spiritual awakening. It was also a financial one. He had encountered the first crack in identity-based wealth. When identity changes, assets lose meaning. Back in Assisi, Francis began giving away money impulsively. Not strategically, not wisely. His father was furious. A merchant understands waste instinctively. To him, Francis looked reckless, ungrateful, dangerous to the family legacy. The conflict escalated until it reached public humiliation. Francis was summoned before the bishop and townspeople to answer for his behavior. His father demanded repayment, accountability, order. Francis listened quietly. Then he did something that still unsettles even modern minds. He removed his clothes. He stood naked before the crowd and returned everything to his father. Not only money, not only inheritance, even the garments on his body. He declared that from that moment on, he recognized no father but heaven. This was not symbolism. It was severance. Francis burned his ledgers publicly. Not literal books, perhaps, but something far more consequential. The internal accounting that defined worth, obligation, and trajectory. For a merchant family, ledgers are memory. They track effort, risk, success. They justify identity. Francis destroyed that memory in one irreversible act. This is the mythic layer. A man annihilates his economic past in full view of the system that produced him. The spiritual insight beneath it is brutal. You cannot build a new life on old accounting. As long as you measure yourself by past investments, you remain loyal to futures that no longer fit. Most people never burn their ledgers. They carry them quietly. Sunk costs, years invested, money spent, status earned, expectations accumulated. These ledgers whisper constantly. Stay, continue, justify. Francis refused. From a financial perspective, this is the most violent form of renunciation. Not poverty forced by loss, but poverty chosen in full awareness of alternatives. He knew exactly what he was giving up. Comfort, security, respectability, upward mobility. He had tasted them all, and he walked away. This is why Francis terrifies systems. You can negotiate with the poor. You cannot negotiate with someone who has consciously rejected leverage. Once Francis had nothing, he became uncontrollable. He wandered the countryside, repairing chapels, begging for food, sleeping wherever he could. But unlike Diogenes, Francis did not seek confrontation. His poverty was not critique. It was invitation. People felt it immediately. He did not accuse wealth. He simply made it look unnecessary. This is an important distinction. Diogenes humiliated society. Francis disarmed it. As we move deeper into this chapter, we will see how Francis transformed renunciation into a force that outlasted empires, and why burning your ledgers is sometimes the only way to regain control of your future. Once Francis had nothing, something unexpected happened. People listened, not because he was persuasive, but because he was unburdened. His words carried no agenda. He did not ask for donations. He did not sell redemption. He did not promise returns. He spoke plainly, lived plainly, and moved on. In a world saturated with transaction, this felt like relief. Francis begged, but not with shame. He asked for what was needed, and no more. If food arrived, he ate. If it did not, he endured. This rhythm trained something rare: trust without expectation. He trusted life without demanding it prove itself. From the outside, this looked reckless. From the inside, it was disciplined. Francis had not abandoned economics. He had abandoned accounting driven by ego. He understood something merchants often miss. When you optimize only for accumulation, you distort your relationship with time. Everything becomes future-oriented. You borrow peace from tomorrow and hope it arrives intact. Francis returned peace to the present. There is a lesser-known tension within the early Franciscan movement. As followers gathered, donations increased. Land was offered. Buildings proposed. Stability tempted the group. Francis resisted fiercely. He feared institutionalization more than hunger. Why? Because institutions require ledgers. Ledgers demand justification. Justification demands growth. Growth demands compromise. Francis recognized the pattern immediately. What begins as support ends as control. He insisted that the order own nothing, not individually, not collectively. This was radical even by religious standards. Most monasteries accumulated land for survival. Francis wanted survival without ownership. This is the philosophical core of his rebellion. Ownership creates attachment. Attachment distorts intention. Distorted intention corrodes integrity. From a financial lens, Francis identified a truth modern people feel but cannot articulate. Wealth changes incentives silently. It does not corrupt instantly. It persuades. It introduces options that feel reasonable until they become necessary. Francis chose fragility over compromise. This choice is difficult to admire honestly because it confronts a painful question. How much of your current life exists not because it is right, but because changing it would disrupt comfort? Francis disrupted everything at once. He wore rags not as performance, but as insulation against temptation. He refused money not because it was evil, but because it altered relationships. When money enters, expectations follow. Francis wanted relationships unmediated. People gave him food because they wanted to, not because they owed him. This distinction mattered deeply to him. There is an account of Francis weeping when someone slipped him coins secretly. He feared the reintroduction of ledgers into his life. Coins carried memory. Memory invited comparison. Comparison invited desire. Desire was the enemy. Unlike Diogenes, Francis did not mock desire. He mourned it. He saw how it hollowed people out, how it turned generosity into transaction and care into calculation. Financial systems are built on calculation. Francis stepped outside that world entirely, and paradoxically, his influence exploded. Crowds followed him. Nobles listened. Even the church hesitated before him, not because he demanded reform, but because he could not be bribed. This is the uncomfortable power of ledger burning. When you erase internal accounting, you become immune to manipulation through reward or threat. But there is a cost. Francis lived with constant uncertainty, hunger, exposure, rejection. He accepted this not as virtue, but as consequence. Freedom without buffers is fragile. He knew this. He chose it anyway. The question is not whether his path is right for everyone. It is whether you have ever truly considered the price you pay for not choosing it. Every retained ledger binds you to a future you may no longer want. Francis teaches that sometimes the bravest financial act is not optimization, but abandonment. Not because you hate what you have, but because you refuse to let it define what comes next. As we move into the final part of this chapter, we will confront the most difficult implication of Francis's life. What happens when renunciation itself begins to attract wealth? And whether it is possible to refuse it twice. Francis discovered, slowly and against his will, that refusal has a strange gravity. The more he rejected ownership, the more it pursued him. The more he insisted on poverty, the more resources gathered around his path. Followers arrived with empty hands and full hearts. Nobles arrived with land deeds trembling in their fingers. Bishops arrived with questions they did not want answered. Francis had not planned this. He did not seek followers. He did not found an order in the way institutions are founded. He simply lived, and others recognized in his life a freedom they could not name but desperately wanted. This is where renunciation reveals its final paradox. When you no longer chase wealth, you become trustworthy. And trust attracts wealth more reliably than ambition ever could. Francis saw the danger immediately. He understood that influence is heavier than money. Money can be dropped. Influence seeps into expectation. People wanted him to lead, to decide, to organize, to stabilize. Stability meant structure. Structure meant property. Property meant ledgers reborn. Francis resisted with increasing urgency. He wrote rules that prohibited ownership in every form. He demanded that even buildings be held in trust by others, never by the order itself. He insisted on wandering, on begging, on remaining visibly dependent on goodwill rather than assets. This was not naivety. It was foresight. Francis knew that the moment his movement became financially secure, it would become spiritually compromised. Security breeds caution. Caution breeds calculation. Calculation resurrects the very ledgers he had burned naked in the square of Assisi. History proved him right. After his death, the Franciscan movement fractured. One faction insisted on absolute poverty. Another argued for practicality. Land was acquired. Buildings rose. Administration thickened. Ledgers returned, quietly, reasonably, inevitably. And yet, something essential remained. The memory of a man who had the courage to walk away cleanly. Francis' life teaches a lesson more severe than Diogenes and more destabilizing than Seneca. It teaches that some forms of freedom are incompatible with permanence. They must be chosen again and again, against rising comfort, against applause, against the temptation to settle. This is the financial insight most avoid. Every system you build will eventually ask you to protect it. Protection changes you. It narrows options. It introduces fear of loss. Francis chose exposure over protection. He accepted uncertainty as the cost of integrity, hunger as the cost of alignment, ridicule as the cost of sincerity. In modern terms, this is radical optionality. The ability to walk away not only from wealth, but from the structures that wealth builds around you. Most people cannot do this even once. Francis did it repeatedly. He burned his ledgers when he was young and tempted. He tried to burn them again when he was famous and revered. The second fire was harder. This is the true test. It is easy to renounce what no longer excites you. It is difficult to renounce what the world celebrates you for. Francis teaches that freedom is not a destination reached once, but a discipline maintained against accumulation of comfort. Ask yourself this quietly. If the life you once rejected came back offering stability, respect, and security, would you recognize it as the same trap? Francis did. He died poor, exhausted, and unprotected. And yet, his influence outlived kings, merchants, and institutions that once dismissed him as reckless. Why? Because he proved something rare. That it is possible to step completely outside the accounting of the world and still matter. The merchant burned his ledgers not to escape responsibility, but to escape captivity to the past. And in doing so, he left behind a truth that unsettles every balance sheet. Sometimes, the only way to reclaim the future is to erase the math that brought you here. The room was not empty because it lacked things. It was empty because it refused to be crowded. In Japan, emptiness has a name. Ma. Not absence. Not nothingness. But the space between things that gives them meaning. To Western eyes, the traditional Japanese room feels unfinished. Tatami mats, sliding paper doors, a single scroll, perhaps a flower arranged with care so deliberate it feels almost severe. No excess furniture, no clutter, no attempt to impress. The room does not shout its value. It waits. This waiting is not passive. It is intentional. Japan learned this lesson the hard way. Earthquakes, fires, typhoons, cities that burned repeatedly. Wood and paper replaced stone and marble, not because they were cheaper, but because they were wiser. When destruction is inevitable, permanence becomes arrogance. And so Japanese culture evolved around impermanence. Homes designed to be rebuilt, objects designed to be removed, beauty designed to fade. The goal was not to defeat loss, but to coexist with it. This philosophy flowed inward, from architecture into mind. A room filled with objects demands attention. Each item asks to be noticed, remembered, maintained. The empty room asks nothing. And because it asks nothing, it gives clarity. The tea masters understood this long before modern psychology did. In the tea room, nothing was accidental. The absence of decoration was itself a form of discipline. Guests entered through a small door that forced them to bow, regardless of status. Inside, hierarchy dissolved. What mattered was presence. A single utensil placed with intention mattered more than a room full of luxury. This was not minimalism as aesthetic. It was minimalism as cognitive hygiene. The Japanese understood something subtle and dangerous. Possessions do not merely occupy space. They occupy thought. They pull the mind backward into memory and forward into obligation. Repair, replacement, comparison, attachment. The empty room interrupts this loop. In Zen monasteries, monks swept floors that were already clean, not to improve them, but to empty the mind of accumulation. The broom was a tool not of cleanliness, but of release. This is the mythic layer, emptiness as practice. But beneath it lies a financial truth that modern life refuses to see. Every object you own has a hidden interest rate, not measured in money, but in attention. Attention is finite. When it is fragmented, decision quality degrades. When decision quality degrades, wealth leaks. Most financial mistakes are not made because of ignorance. They are made because of noise. Noise comes from clutter. Physical, mental, emotional. The Japanese room removes noise at the root. Consider how decisions feel in a cluttered space. The mind jumps, Thoughts scatter. Urgency rises without reason. Now imagine making the same decision in an empty room. The contrast is immediate. The mind slows. Priorities sort themselves without force. This is not mysticism. It is neurology. The brain evolved to scan environments for threat. Clutter multiplies signals. Each object becomes a micro-demand. The nervous system never fully rests. Chronic low-level stress becomes baseline. From that baseline, people spend impulsively, chase stimulation, seek relief through consumption. The empty room interrupts this cycle. This is why Japanese minimalism does not celebrate owning less for moral reasons. It celebrates needing less for functional ones. When the environment is calm, the mind stops grasping. And when the mind stops grasping, desire loosens. This is where the financial lesson begins to sharpen. Desire is expensive, not in the obvious ways, not only in purchases, but in upgrades, in comparisons, in maintaining alignment with imagined standards. Desire inflates the minimum income required to feel normal. The empty room lowers that threshold. In such a space, the absence of objects does not feel like deprivation. It feels like relief. There is nothing to manage, nothing to justify, nothing to protect. The room becomes a buffer between the individual and the market's endless demands. The Japanese did not invent this as resistance to capitalism. They arrived at it through survival. When you rebuild often, you learn not to attach deeply to what will not last.